Hello, everyone. Welcome to another fabulous webinar conducted by Alex Barthet. Today's webinar is Pay When Paid Sucks. So this is to get paid anyways. I'm Ariella Wagner, the founder of SunRay Construction Solutions. We help thousands of subcontractors and suppliers throughout the United States secure their lien and bond claim rights. Without further ado, I introduce the amazing Alex.
Thank you, Ariella. This is Alex Barthet. As Ariella said, I am a board-certified construction attorney here in Florida. And today we're going to talk about why pay when paid sucks, but what you can do to get paid anyways. But that being said, if you happen to be a GC on this call, I will tell you what you can do to make sure you keep your pay when paid provision alive and well. So let's get into the details of exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what is a pay when paid provision. What does it look like? What is the magic language that must be in the pay when paid provision to make it enforceable? It's a very simple and easy test that I'm going to show you how it works. As a GC, what can you do to keep the pay when paid provision alive? And as a subcontractor, what can you do to get rid of it? Then we'll talk about lien and bond rights, because interestingly, in almost every situation, if you have a lien or you have a bond claim, the pay when paid doesn't even matter. So it's important that you secure those rights. And then, as always, I will answer all the questions you have at the very end. About those questions, use the GoToWebinar chat box. Go ahead and submit your question. Please do not include the names of any people or companies. We will answer all of your questions at the end, so submit them during the course of the presentation. We'll get to them at the very end. So let's get right into it. What is a pay when paid provision? In short, a pay when paid provision is a contract provision. So you have to have a written agreement to have a pay when paid provision. And that provision shifts the risk of non-payment from one party to another party. So the classic example that we see all the time is the risk shifting between owner non-payment and contractor non-payment. So if the owner doesn't pay the contractor, then the contractor doesn't have to pay the subcontractor. But it can exist in other places too. So for example, if you are a subcontractor and you want to shift that risk to your subcontractors, you can do that by having a written pay when paid provision in your subcontract. So if the owner doesn't pay the contractor, therefore the contractor doesn't pay you as a sub, then you can pass that non-payment potentially onto your sub so that you don't have to pay your sub. In Florida, the pay when paid defense is valid and enforceable. So you need to be keenly aware of what it looks like and how it works so you can deal with it in your contracts. I've been doing this now for going on 21 years. It is pretty common that almost every contract we see that comes across our desk has a pay when paid provision in it. As a result, you should know that almost any contract you sign is going to likely have this pay when paid provision. So let's take a look at the magic language. So what has to be in the contract for a pay when paid provision to be enforceable? So generally speaking, it needs to use the words condition precedent or contingent upon in the paragraph itself. So here's a sample provision. It says, under no circumstances shall the contractor be obligated to pay the subcontractor until funds have been advanced by the owner. Now, I know that probably to you it sounds like a pay when paid provision, and I'm sure the person that wrote it intended it to be, but the courts have specifically said that this is not a valid pay when paid provision because it doesn't have the magic language. So this provision does not work. Let's take a look at one that does. Final payment shall be made within 30 days of completion of the construction project, acceptance by the owner, and as a, here we go, condition precedent, receipt of final payment from the owner. So this provision works because it has the magic language. So as a GC, what can you do to deal with pay when paid provisions? Obviously, you want to have a pay when paid provision in your contract. Absolutely critical. It is probably the single most significant contractual defense provision that you can have in your contract. I mean, you can always argue that the sub is not entitled to payment because they were late. You had to supplement their forces. Their work was no good. They didn't pay vendors, so you had to pay them yourself. But if everything goes right and you still are not paid, then the only way you're going to get out of payment is with the pay when paid provision because the owner didn't pay you. So, one, make sure you have a written contract with your subcontractors. Two, make sure it has a pay when paid provision that's valid and enforceable because it needs to have the condition precedent or contingent upon language in it. If that exists, you should be okay, meaning more often than not, much more often than not, your provision will be found to be valid and enforceable. Now, if you bond a job, so maybe you're a public general contractor, you're doing public work, or you do work where the private owner is expecting you to issue a bond, just know that your bond is not subject to the pay when paid defense. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later as a way for subs to get paid even if they sign a pay when paid defense. So I want to be very clear here so that everyone understands. If you as a GC do everything right, you get a written agreement with your sub, that subcontract has a pay when paid provision, but you issue a payment bond on the project, your surety is not entitled to use the pay when paid defense. They can use every other defense. They can use the defense of the work was no good, the project was late, the imposition of liquidated damages as a way to offset payment, but they cannot use the pay when paid defense. So if you are a bonded contractor, know that that defense does not exist for your surety. There's one very narrow situation in which it does, and that's if you issue what's called a conditional payment bond, but those are very rare. I would tell you we see those maybe out of every 100 bonds that we see, 1 or 2 are conditional payment bonds, and they're not allowed on public jobs. So just know that there's a way to make your bonding company have the benefit of the pay when paid, and that's called a conditional payment bond, but it's very rare. And most owners that know what they're doing will not accept a conditional payment bond because they don't want you to have the pay when paid defense. The other thing that you want to do is that if you agree with the owner to pay your final bill, you want the owner to agree that they're going to pay you as the GC that final payment just like they pay every other payment. What I mean by that is typically when you get paid on a construction project, you provide conditional releases for the current payment and unconditional releases for the month prior where you had already received the payment the prior month. So you effectively provide trailing releases that are conditional today but become unconditional when you make the payment. Many contracts include a provision that says when you as the GC get to the end of the job, you need to give us an affidavit or releases that say you've paid everyone before we as the owner pay you the final payment. If you have a contract provision like that in your prime contract, that's the contract between you and the owner, then that may invalidate the pay when paid provision with your subcontracts. So you just to be very careful about how that provision is written. The other thing that you want to do is be certain that you're forcing your subs to keep working during the course of a non-payment or dispute situation. So here's a sample provision that we see that exists in many prime contracts. Subcontractor shall diligently proceed with the work during any dispute, even as it relates to payment or changes. The existence of a dispute shall not be grounds for any failure to perform by subcontractor. So this makes it very clear that the sub even if you haven't paid them or there's a dispute related to work or changes, they have to keep working. Again, this is a pretty common provision that we see in most subcontracts. So as a subcontractor, what should you do? So the first thing you could try to do is strike the provision, the pay when paid provision. Probably not going to happen. I have no immediate recollection of a client trying to strike it and having it work. Very rarely we have clients have some success at striking just the magic language, that condition, precedent, or contingent upon language, right? So they leave the pay when paid provision in, but they just strike those few words. That sometimes happens when you're negotiating with the other side and they don't understand the significance of those words. You can look at the prime contract. You remember I told you if the prime contract requires that the owner requires that the contractor pay the owner, that the contractor provide releases to the owner before the owner makes final payment. If that exists, even if you have a pay when paid provision in your contract, you may be able to invalidate that pay when paid provision because that completely separate provision exists in the prime contract. Again, it's a very narrow situation. It almost only comes up when you get to final payment, because that's usually when it exists in the prime contract. But it's worth looking at, and probably your subcontract says that it incorporates the prime contract, so you should be getting a copy of that prime contract anyways and seeing what are the provisions in it, because you're agreeing not only to the provisions in your subcontract, but all the provisions in the prime contract. So it'd be nice to know what those provisions are, not just payment provisions, but other provisions. For all you know, there's a $10,000 liquidated damage provision in the prime contract that you may be obligated for, even if it's not written word for word in your subcontract. If you have lien rights or you make a bond claim, those rights are not subject to the pay when paid defense. So if you sign a contract with a general contractor as a subcontractor, you don't get paid because the contractor has not been paid by the owner, and you have lien rights. When you timely record your lien, the owner does not have the benefit of a pay when paid defense, so you can still move forward and foreclose on your lien. So keep that in mind, that it is absolutely critical that you timely secure your lien and bond rights. And again, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So one of the things that you should consider doing, and I strongly encourage this, is that you as a sub include what's called a stop work provision in your contract. You're probably not going to be able to negotiate out the pay when paid provision, but what you probably can negotiate in is some version of a stop work provision. So here's a sample of just a very simple one. Subcontractor can slow or stop work without liability or penalty if it has not been paid its draw request in 30 days after submission. Now, I'm not suggesting that a contractor is going to agree to this as written. Maybe they'll say 45 days or 60 days or 90 days. Maybe they have some other tweaks that they want to make. But having the ability to stop work if you are not paid, to me, is probably the single most important change or addition you can make to most subcontracts. Because imagine this, you're doing work on a project, you have a dispute, the owner's not paying, there's issues with change orders, and you've signed a contract that requires that you keep working no matter what. So who's financing the job? You're financing the job. So you need to find a way to be able to stop the bleeding. Again, it may not entitle you to payment, but at least it gives you the ability to stop working. So keep that in mind. Actually, before we go on to the next topic, I'm sure there's some suppliers that are listening in. So how does pay when paid affect suppliers? In short, it doesn't if the only agreement that exists between you and your customer you, the supplier, and your customer, whether that's the owner, the GC, the subcontractor, is your credit application. I'm going to say that your credit application does not include any type of a pay when paid provision. It probably has very specific payment terms, possibly even a guarantee of some sort. So pay when paid doesn't directly affect suppliers because there's no written agreement that has a pay when paid provision in it. Here is where we see one major exception, and it's important as a supplier to be aware of this. Sometimes you may fill an order upon receipt of a written purchase order, and that purchase order may in fact include terms and conditions. If it does, and one of those terms and conditions is the pay when paid provision, then even if they've signed your credit app, if you subsequently fill, you may not even have to sign it, but you subsequently fill a purchase order which has terms and conditions, you may be obligated and bound by that pay when paid provision. So what does that mean as a supplier? You need to be absolutely certain that your team knows that if you are filling orders against a purchase order that you receive, does that purchase order have terms and conditions? If so, what are those terms and conditions, and do you agree to them? Also be aware that some terms and conditions may be found on a website, which is perfectly legal. So the purchase order may say, ship me 4 truckloads of Schedule 40 pipe. And it says, this purchase order is subject to the terms and conditions found at www. Such and such website. And you go to that website and it has a pay when paid provision. You may be bound as a supplier to those terms and conditions. So you need to be very careful in looking at purchase orders when they come in. And what you need to do is you need to, 1, not fill the purchase order without, 2, sending back some written document saying, we do not agree to these terms and conditions. Our terms and conditions are the ones found in our credit app. Please confirm before we ship. Or you negotiate the terms of the purchase order. So be very careful about filling purchase orders that have terms and conditions. The converse is also true. If you're a subcontractor or a contractor placing orders with your supplier, if you send them a written purchase order that has terms and conditions, including a pay when paid, you may bind them potentially to your pay when paid defense if you have that in your purchase order. So let's go over lien and bond rights so everyone is on the same page about how they work and the timing of them. So who can make a lien or bond claim in the state of Florida? Laborers, that's John Smith the carpenter. He or she, they can record a lien on a project. Architects, engineers, and land surveyors, they all have lien rights. Contractors, that's anyone in direct contract with the owner. So if I'm an electrician and I have a direct contract with the owner, under the lien law, I'm a contractor, I'm not a subcontractor, and I have to follow all of those rules. Anyone that's a subcontractor or subcontractor, they have lien and bond rights. And material suppliers or rental companies, whether they have a contract directly with the owner, the contractor, the subcontractor, or the subcontractor, they all have lien rights. And that is the bottom rung of the folks that have lien rights. Anyone that comes after them on the chain of contracts no longer has lien or bond rights. So a material supplier to a material supplier does not have lien rights. So if I'm a material supplier and another material supplier buys materials from me, they may have lien or bond rights, but I don't because I sold it to a material supplier. And then a subcontractor does not have lien rights. So assuming you have lien rights, how do you perfect those lien rights? Step 1, no later than 45 days from your first work, you need to serve your notice to owner, that's for liens, or the notice to contractor. That's if you have bonds. Now, when you use SunRay, they use what's called a combined form, which is both the notice to owner and the notice to contractor form together. So it's one document, and it covers both jobs that you can lien and jobs that you have bond rights on. 45 days is the absolute last day for that document to be physically received by the owner or the contractor and surety, for it to be valid. Now, when you use SunRay, what they do is they used a manifest. And there's a rule in the lien law that says that if they bring it to the post office by the 40th day, and it's their manifest is stamped, and they go to the post office every day, even during the coronavirus, and they get it stamped, then whether or not it's actually received by the owner or the contractor or the surety, it's deemed delivered. So why is this important to you? This is absolutely critical for you so that you do not delay in requesting and serving your notice to owner. I suggest that you do it within days after starting work on a job, or first delivering material on a job, or after you sign a contract on a job. There's nothing wrong with doing it early in the 45 days. You run into big problems when you do it too late. Obviously, if you have a direct contract with an owner, you don't need to send a notice to owner. I strongly encourage that you do, because it is a great collection tool, and it's relatively inexpensive. So even if I'm a contractor and I don't have to send a notice to owner to the owner, I would recommend that you do it. If you are a subcontractor to a bonded contractor, let's say you're the electrician to the bonded contractor who's working for Miami-Dade County Schools, you as the subcontractor to the bonded contractor, you don't need to send a notice to contractor, which is the document to give you rights on the bond, because you have a direct contract with that bonded contractor. Again, I still think that you should. My advice, and I know it's SunRay's advice as well, is you should determine in your office an internal amount that any job over a certain amount, $200, $500, $2,500, any job over that threshold, you notice it, period. Where we see clients make mistakes and lose money is where they try to manage their notices so closely that they say, oh, we need one on this job, but we don't need one on this job, so we're not going to send it there. That's when we see mistakes happen. And, you know, it doesn't take much for you to lose lien rights on a job where you're owed. It could be not a lot of money, $5,000, $10,000, and that by itself would have paid to notice all of the jobs for the rest of the year, whether you needed them or not. So I strongly encourage you to notice all your jobs so that you don't run into an issue. So that's step one. Step two, no later than 90 days from your last work, you need to record your lien or serve your notice of non-payment on the contractor and surety. 90 days. 90 days is not 3 months. Some months have more than 30 days. Some months have fewer than 30 days. So remember that you need to count correctly. I strongly encourage you not to wait until day 88 to start the process. I recommend that you start the process at about day 60 after your last work to move forward to put together the lien, because it takes time to prepare it, sign it, notarize it, record it even electronically. Takes at least several days. And also remember that last work does not include punch list or warranty work. It has to be contract work or change order work that's approved for it to count as your last work. Step three, within 15 days of recording the lien, you need to serve it on all interested parties. Again, when you use SunRay, they take care of all of that for you by not only recording it, but serving it on everybody. And then step four, for those that are in privity with the owner, you need to provide what's called a contractor's final affidavit. And that has to be done at least 5 days before you file suit on the lien. We recommend that it's done at the time you lien. It doesn't have to be. You could do it later, but that's an additional requirement that if you're in direct contract with the owner, you need this additional document, not recorded, just served on the owner. And then finally, step 5, if you have a lien, you need to file a lawsuit on that lien within 1 year of the recording date of the claim of lien. If you have a bond claim, a notice of non-payment that you serve to a surety and contractor, you need to file that lawsuit on the bond no later than 1 year from your last work. So notice there's a difference between the two. For liens, it's from the date of the lien. For bonds, it's the date of your last work, which could be potentially up to a 90-day difference. I strongly encourage you not to be waiting anywhere near that long. I would say within 60 days, give or take, of you recording a lien or sending your notice of non-payment, if you haven't been paid and you have no other reason to wait, then you should go ahead and start the legal process. Do we have any questions? Ariella? Well, it looks like we may have lost Ariella. If you want more information on liens, bonds, and contracts, you can get it from our podcast, which is weekly. It's the Lien Zone podcast. And our next webinar is, I sent my notice of non-payment. Why won't the surety pay me already? We'll do that on June 18th from 9 to 9:20. You can go to sunraynotice.com/education. We do these webinars for free every month. In the middle of the month, you can get the full list of notices of events at sunraynotice.com/education. Again, it looks like Ariella lost her internet connection. So I think we're going to have to, unless she's there, let's see. Are you there, Ariella? So I think if you have any questions, I apologize for the technical difficulty.
Thank you. I am back.
Oh, welcome back, Ariella.
The internet connection unfortunately went out, so I apologize. And we do have some really great questions that people have asked.
I'm ready.
Okay. So, yes, it says, will you have this for a printout? We will certainly provide a printout of the presentation. So the answer is there was a question by, do you only work in Florida or can you help in other states as well, multi-state contractors? Alex is a board certified attorney in the state of Florida. However, we do work with attorneys throughout the United States. So if there's a specific state or states that you need assistance in, please, as you could see, my email address, ariella@sunraynotice.com. Feel free to send me an email on those states and I'd be happy to email you with attorneys' contacts. Their information. Let's see, we have 2 other questions. The magic words when you try to strike out the pay when paid. Could you explain that again very quickly? That's for you.
Okay, so let's go back here. Give me a second. We'll go back to that provision very early on in the slide. And I will show you. Hold on. Okay, so if we look at these provisions, right? So the bottom one, final payment shall be made within 30 days of completion of the construction project, acceptance by the owner and as a condition precedent, receipt of final payment. So ideally, you would like to be able to strike that whole provision. I don't think that that's going to happen. But the next thing you could try to do is just strike out the words condition precedent. So the sentence would read, final payment shall be made within 30 days of completion of the construction project, acceptance by the owner, and receipt of final payment from the owner. So you would get rid of, specifically in this sentence, as a condition precedent. So you would get rid of those words. The intent is to try to make the provision unenforceable by taking out the language that you know needs to be in there to make it enforceable. Again, I think you're going to have a hard time doing that in most instances, but you have a better chance of doing just that versus striking the whole provision. Any other questions, Ariella?
They said, thank you very much. And that seems to be all the questions for now. However, if anyone has any questions that they could think of later, feel free to send us an email. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And Alex, as always, spectacular, amazing job.
Thank you very much, Ariella.
And I wish everyone a safe and sunny day.
Thanks. Have a great day, everybody.